So, here we are. The end of days, Ragnarok, or perhaps more fittingly, Revelations. Whatever you want to call it, this is it. The end. The Omega. The finale. Of this stupid video series about a big titty angel cartoon. We've come a long way, you and I, and at last we've reached the concluding chapter of the love letter. So, here we go. Part 1. Intro. Sora no Atashimono, final, eternal my master. The name alone sends chills down many a fan's spine, and with good reason. This second and final movie closing out the SNO anime is widely regarded, both in and outside of the fanbase, as a literal dumpster fire. I'll tell you guys right now, going into this, that this movie is the single worst piece of media that I have ever seen in my entire life. You might have come into this video thinking it was just bad, but you guys don't even know the half of it. So, our story begins, as many do, with disappointment. Back in January of 2012, which, for those keeping track, was just after Clockwork Angeloid had premiered in Japan, and before I had even been able to see it, it was grandly announced that a third season of the Heaven's Lost Property TV anime was being produced, and I, of course, rejoiced at the prospect. Like I said, this was before I had seen the first movie. But even after Clockwork Angeloid's assassination of my soul, I found myself thinking, well, a season 3 would be a chance at redemption, right? I mean, sure, they had already ruined Chaos, so they couldn't do anything with her, but that only excluded, the entire rest of the story, but hey, hope for the best, right? Well, that vague Season 3 coming eventually announcement hung in the air for a full year and a half. That is 22 goddamn months of anticipation, while we were all off on the sidelines going, any day now. But eventually, someone put out a second announcement that the third season had been cancelled. But that's okay, we were told, because it hadn't just been cancelled, it had been replaced with a movie. Sora no Atashimono Final, Eternal My Master. A conclusive finale to the anime storyline with the goal of adapting the manga's ending and definitively wrapping up the entire plot. And that was a problem. And it was a problem for blindingly obvious reasons. The anime skipping to the end of the manga and adapting that story is impossible, because at this point, the two versions of the show are completely incompatible, like trying to breed a fish with a horse. As a result of how drastically the ending of Forte and the first movie had veered off script, not only was Hiyori a proverbial Schrodinger's Neko, in a constant state of being both alive and dead, but the story as told by the manga was predicated on Chaos being the principal antagonist, which, barring a particularly hefty retcon that of course did not occur, made the ending of the manga now impossible to adapt after Forte magically turned her good and awarded her with main character status. Basically, the ending of the manga is a story that only happens because Hiyori is dead and Chaos is the villain, and the anime creators came out and said, we're going to adapt that. except in the anime's universe where Hiyori is alive and Chaos is a good guy. So you can see that before production had even begun, the most basic elevator pitch of this movie was already a fundamentally broken concept. But believe it or not, we're still only seeing the top layer of this iceberg made from frozen piss. It still gets so much worse from here. So, before we really start in earnest, there are a few things I want you guys to keep in mind as we go. Number 1. This quote-unquote movie is actually only 40 minutes long. We'll talk about that more later, but for now, understand this is not a movie. It's even more of a glorified OVA than Clockwork Angeloid was. And number 2, well, this movie is, to put it lightly, confusing. In the process of making this review, I have seen it at least a dozen times now, and it still confuses me. You'll just be watching the movie normally and still constantly asking questions, like, wait, how did that last scene lead into this one? Or why is this character acting like this now? Or what's even happening in the story? I've tried my absolute best to unpack the film here so that it makes sense, even to someone who's never actually watched it, but I am serious when I say this movie is so confusing that I worry my best wasn't good enough. And it gets worse because the film's problems are so interlinked with each other that, like a crossword puzzle with 0 clues, understanding one specific part requires you already understand the construction of the whole, which is why the format of this video will be different from my review of the first movie. Instead of going through the film chronologically and bringing up problems as I find them, I'm instead going to spend about 20-ish minutes recapping the entire movie's plot first to give you that understanding of the whole, and then once we've done that, I'll be able to dig into the specifics after. But that means that as we go through the film in this recap, you'll probably end up being at least a little confused, and that's an unfortunate compromise that I've had to make. But you guys should know that it's not your fault. By having watched Season 1, Forte, and Clockwork Angeloid, you have already seen the entirety of the animated adaptations of Heaven's Lost Property. So, in just a second, when nothing makes any goddamn sense, don't worry, it's not because you're missing anything, or skipped a whole season of anime you didn't know existed. It's because the movie is shit and decided not to adapt crucial scenes from the manga, despite its plot relying heavily on them. Part 2. The movie. So, all of that out of the way, I'm going to attempt to simply, factually, recount the plot of the movie for you. Well, I won't say without commentary, questions, or asides, but at the very least, as few of those things as I can manage. Oh, and just for comedy's sake, it is fun to keep in mind that the ending of Clockwork Angeloid, where Hiyori explodes, and this movie's opening are contiguous as far as the anime-only watchers are concerned. There is 0 additional context between that event and this one, except to have read the manga. Alright, ready? Let's go. So, the movie opens with Nymph dying in an explosion. We cut down to the surface where, at first, Tomoki is just excited that Zeus was destroyed, but Ikaros informs him that Nymph died in the process. Tomoki becomes mildly perturbed at this, and orders Ikaros to take him to the Synapse. Meanwhile, the world is ending, as the entire universe is being dissolved by a terrible-looking CGI effect. Tomoki appears to be mildly perturbed by this as well. On the way up, Ikaros tells him a story. A long time ago, Minos ordered her to attack some humans living on the surface. While doing this, Ikaros malfunctioned in some unspecified way and was ordered by Mini Tomoki here to attack the Synapse in retaliation. Flashback to the present, and Tomoki says she can finish the story once they're done here. Flashback from there to Sukata dying. Oh, yeah, he's dead too, apparently. Back to the present again, and Tomoki says, It's just like that time with Suguta. But Ikaros continues her story regardless, telling us that she nearly destroyed the synapse, and that once she was eventually under control again, was implanted with a device that will cause her to self-destruct if she tries to enter the synapse again without permission, as her wings catch ablaze in the shittiest fire CGI effect ever seen in animation. Discovering this, Tomoki orders Ikaros to turn around, but the world is almost done being dissolved by that other bad CGI effect, and so Ikaros disobeys his order. She tells him that she's enjoyed every second living down on the surface, giving the movie an excuse to use a few old cuts of animation, and Tomoki screams in anguish as she flies closer and closer to the synapse. Title card, Sora no Atashimono Final. Eternal My Master. So, hypothetically, that was the in medias res opening, which the rest of the movie will then proceed to give us context for, so that when we cut back to here at the ending, all of this will make perfect sense. Let's observe. Flashback to some unspecified amount of time prior to this opening scene. We see that it's your average everyday in Sarami as we cut to Ikaros waking Tomoki up. She leans in close enough to almost kiss him, but Tomoki wakes up first and then fucking sucker punches her. Cut to Ikaros making breakfast, and we see that Nymph and Astria are fighting about who gets to take Tomoki out on a date. Oh, also, Chaos is here. Now, we see that Ikaros is also interested in going on a date with Tomoki, but by the time she makes it to the living room, they've already all left. Sad. The date goes about as you'd expect, and Chaos makes a joke. We then cut back to Ikaros, spending her time doing chores around the house and talking to Hiyori about the watermelon patch out back. Relatedly, Hiyori is alive. Then Ikaros loses control of the hose and gets to both of them wet, because it's been 10 minutes and we haven't seen any tits yet. Then Mikako and Suguta walk up, and he asks to speak to both of them privately. Now, this next scene is one of those bits where my job gets really difficult, because it's a narrative-driven dialogue scene, but all the subbed versions of the movie have hot garbage translations, which makes it incredibly difficult to tell how much of the crap dialogue is the fault of the subs or the movie's script. And usually if that happens, I at least have the manga to fall back on for comparisons, but this scene is anime original, so I'll try my best, but I make no guarantees. Thus begins a massive exposition dump. The short version is that Suguta wants to talk to Ikaros about the synapse, but she is silent on the matter as ever. He tells her that, eventually, Tomoki will want to go to the synapse, because he has read the script and knows that that will happen, and he tells her that she should be proactive and settle things with them once and for all before that happens, or she runs the risk of Tomoki getting hurt. Now, in response to this, Hiyori says, well, the subtitles have her saying something completely different, but what I infer is actually being said here is, hey, when I was an angeloid, I had a bomb in my collar, and so did Nymph. Maybe Ikaros has something similar, and that's why she's so hesitant to get involved with the synapse again, because Hiyori has read the script and knows that that will happen. In addition, Hiyori tells us that when she blew up at the end of the last movie, she ended up, quote, wandering between dimensions, seeing a bunch of parallel worlds, and the only thing they all had in common was that Tomoki didn't exist anywhere except for in this specific reality. Not only that, but apparently, quote, all the parallel worlds were under the synapse's rule, and all those worlds were destroyed by the synapse in the end. Now, Sugata's voice actor gets aggressive upon hearing this, but unfortunately they didn't have the budget to actually make him look mad. He then, from the information Hiyori told him, somehow comes to the conclusion that not only were all of these alternate realities destroyed by the synapse, but they were created by them as well, and that Tomoki's existence is what pulled Hiyori back to this world after she died. That's our entire explanation for why Hiyori's alive, by the way. Tomoki is like one of those Hershey's Kisses that keeps balloons from flying away, but for Hiyori's soul instead. Okay. Why? Anyways, then everyone returns from their date and thankfully spares us from any more of this very dumb scene. But unfortunately, my salvation doesn't last as they start another, different dumb scene. Tomoki has a rare moment of self-awareness and wonders if Ikaros could have wanted to go on the date as well. And then his immediate next line is, well, either way, she's never going to smile, is she? Which wins the official Psy Award for the biggest non-sequitur in the history of cinema. He then wonders once again why she can't smile, especially when Nymph and Astria can, eventually deciding it might be because of the imprinting, and then hits upon an idea. That'll have to wait, though, because the writers decide it's time for wacky humor out of nowhere, as the cast debate who stole the last slice of cake for 2 minutes. Short answer was, it was Nymph, even though the wide shot they showed previously gave us no indication of that. See, the manga was clever enough to avoid showing Nymph before the punchline, but here we can clearly see her beforehand, which ruins the joke. Then Ikaros tries to stop Nymph and Astria from fighting, but ends up hitting Tomoki instead. He, immediately forgetting why he came down here in the first place, gets mad and tells all the Angeloids to get out and never come back. Thankfully, Chaos doesn't seem to give a shit in the anime. Then Nymph, Astria, and Tomoki get into a 2-minute fight scene about them freeloading at his house, which was absolutely necessary to include in this 45-minute movie. Then, Tomoki finally remembers that plot point from 5 minutes ago, and orders Ikaros to erase their imprinting, which gets accomplished by the shittiest CGI effect since 10 minutes ago. Then Ikaros starts acting passive-aggressive towards him because she's mad. Seeing this, Mikako offers to be Ikaros' master instead, and then she is. We hard cut immediately to the two of them driving away in a car. Really? There was no conversation about this? Neither Tomoki or Ikaros had a problem with it? It just happened? Okay then. So immediately after they leave, Tomoki starts talking about what a terrible idea giving Mikako an Angeloid was, and so I wonder why he didn't bring up these misgivings 20 seconds ago. Then, Nymph, Astria, and Sahora get mad at him for letting Ikaros go, even though none of them have yet thought to just sit him down and tell him it was a bad idea. Of course, the real reason they do this is because, as I said in Part 8, they need to reenact that train scene from Chapter 35. Of course, this time they're not searching for Hiyori's blackmail, and so I wonder what excuse the writers will give to have them search the room, even though nothing about their situation calls for them to search the room. Let's just take that biggest non-sequitur award away from that earlier scene and give it to this one instead. So they activate the card inside Tomoki's pants because that's how it happened in the manga. I'm going to skip over this since I already explained it in Part 8. I'll just tell you the scene lasts 6 minutes and adds literally nothing to the movie besides padding. Then we cut to Ikaros, Mikako, and Suguta as he tells us he's almost done researching Synapse and is planning to attack them soon. Yeah, good luck with that. Just gonna punch all the Angeloids this time. Then he leaves and Mikako says, Ikaros, please help Suguta, as she hacks Ikaros. We then cut to that flashback from the opening of Ikaros being ordered to attack the Synapse, except now we see that it was Mikako as an angel who was the one who caused Ikaros to malfunction. We'll get to that. So we then cut back to Sahora, Nymph, and Astria, where they reaffirm that Tomoki is indeed in the wrong for erasing Ikaros' imprinting, but now admit that he's just doing what he thinks is right. Because they didn't know that before, even when Tomoki told them that word for word in an earlier scene. Again, the train plot was very necessary. Oh, and then Chaos says a thing. The next morning, Nymph and Astria attempt to cook breakfast without Ikaros, and they don't know how to cook. How wacky and original. One wonders, though, how they got all these live fish, since they'd die if they went into the water. Actually, stupid question. I guess they asked Chaos to get it for them. She's practically a connoisseur by this point. Then, Nymph feeds Tomoki something filled with laxative by mistake, and we have a scene in his imagination where he's a shogun warlord on his throne, and Nymph is trying to break down the gates with a battering ram, and then... I hate this. I hate this! Why am I even bothering to recap this scene like it matters or will be important? Steal a joke from the manga for the sake of padding, and then hastily stitch it between two completely unrelated scenes. That single sentence describes like 50% of this goddamn movie. It makes me think that I sort of took Clockwork Angeloid for granted, you know? Like, at least there, most of the scenes, even if they had plot holes or shitty dialogue or were filler, at least they felt like they fit together, you know? Like, sure, we had scenes where Ikaros and Hiyori hung out together, obviously included for the sole purpose of making Ikaros' attempted self-sacrifice at the end make any kind of sense, and even then it didn't work, but like, at least they were trying? Even if they screwed it up, you can still clearly see how this scene was supposed to help this scene. All the little bits working in tandem for the sake of a larger whole. But here, the core conflict of the movie is Tomoki and Ikaros' relationship. But we just keep getting distracted by who stole the fucking cake, or talking about Nymph and Astria being freeloaders, or getting transported to imaginary trains, or Tomoki eating laxative, and it's exhausting. Nothing here matters, none of it is important, nothing adds together, it's all just a big pile of pointless fucking scenes. So, then the worst part of the movie happens, and if you've read the relevant chapters, you'll know why. Ikaros flies into the house, shoots Astria and Nymph, and then demands that Tomoki go on a date with her. She then picks him up and flies out the door. Nymph then asks Mikako what just happened, and she says that she gave Ikaros a love potion, which I guess implies her hacking did this, maybe? On the way, Tomoki thinks, man, Ikaros sure is acting strangely today, and then yells at her to let go of him, and she complies, dropping him to the ground. He lands inside a restaurant, and Ikaros demands that they go somewhere where they can be alone, and then follows that up by saying, please be my master again. Tomoki ignores her. She tries to assert herself again, so now he just runs away. But no matter where he goes, Ikaros is always right behind him, demanding that he be her master again. Then Tomoki runs to the cherry blossom tree, and every character appears behind him for incredibly flimsy reasons. And we then have a really fucking uncomfortable scene where Tomoki basically gets bullied into being Ikaros' master again, despite clearly being against it. Ikaros asks again, and Tomoki says, quote, you still don't understand? If it's something that you want for yourself, then I'm happy to do whatever, but I don't want to listen to a request like that. So not only is Tomoki being an asshole, he's also now a flaming hypocrite. The gist of what he just said was, if you want me to be your master, sure, that's fine, but I don't want to be your master. Then Mikako walks up and chides Tomoki for being selfish, and then, as Ikaros' current master, orders her to throw Tomoki into the ocean, which she does. As she leaves, Nymph asks Mikako why she did that, and she says that Ikaros is normally only able to express herself in extreme situations. Never mind the fact that Ikaros quite clearly told Tomoki what she wanted not 30 seconds ago, but whatever, this is how it happened in the manga, and so despite a billion things having been changed, that's how it's gonna happen here. Anyways, then everyone smiles because they approve of Mikako's faux murder plot. Tomoki tells Ikaros to stop, but she won't without an order, which Tomoki refuses to give. Then she actually throws him away and lets him fall, before catching him again and telling him to be her master. Then the budget runs out, so they repeat the exact same scene again, using the same cuts of animation. Ikaros then starts yelling that she has nowhere to go if she can't stay with Tomoki, and then she starts screaming, Why? Why was I created and given powers? I don't need them! And yeah, let's just go ahead and move that trophy around again. Then she starts crying, and Tomoki's like, I just wanted you to smile. And fuck you, that is a blatant lie. Then Ikaros redoes the imprinting, and they fly back and show it off. And everyone's happy. And to prove it, we have a montage of everyone smiling, being glad for them, and just loving being alive. And then we flash forward to the opening again. Everyone's dead, the world is ending, and Ikros is flying towards the synapse, killing herself in the process. She tells Tomoki that she loves him, they kiss, and she finally smiles for the first time. If you ignore that time she smiled before this, but I guess we're just forgetting about that. Then she flies into the synapse and dies, as Tomoki yells, "No!" and then presumably falls to the non-existent ground because Ikros didn't actually set him down on anything before she died. That's it. That's the end. Roll credits. Okay. Let's do this thing, but God, where do I even start? I mean, in broad strokes, it's almost easy to summarize the big problems with the film. It opens on the climax of the manga, despite the fact that climax could not have happened in the anime's universe. They then proceed to make zero effort in explaining how it could have happened, and instead fill the intervening 30 minutes with irrelevant comedy scenes and an unrelated plotline about Tomoki erasing Ikros' imprinting, before flashing back to that impossible big climax and then ending on a cliffhanger. Those are the big issues on the macro side of things, but the second you start to dig into any one aspect of this movie's construction, you start to notice the 20 different ways it all breaks apart. Like, imagine if you had a storage locker, full, just absolutely bursting, with tangled up Christmas lights. Sure, it's easy to be like, the problem here is a bunch of disorganized Christmas lights. But the second you then try and pull out a single strand to start actually fixing things, you see that it gets caught on about 50 different other threads, and the real intricacies of the problem become apparent. And it's at that point most people, like 99% of people, would just give up. Fuck it, it's too much work. But I'm not most people, so let's get to it. Part 3. Continuity Chaos. This sorta has to be the thing we tackle first, because it's the giant, obese elephant in the room around which all the movie's other problems orbit. The continuity of this film is fucked beyond belief, and this problem is what rots the entire script from the inside out. Now, I have alluded to this movie being bad before, but bad almost seems like the wrong word to describe it. And sure, I could dig into my thesaurus and pull out other descriptors like contemptible, horrendous, abominable, and all other sorts of fun words along those same lines, and they're all true, but none of them really strike close enough to the heart of the matter for my tastes. But the word that I think does fit, that I keep coming back to time and time again, is quite simply broken. This movie is broken. But talk is cheap. So here's an old visual aid that I used in a previous episode of The Love Letter to show the length of the manga in comparison to the anime. So to go over it again, the Heaven's Lost Property manga is 77 chapters long. The first season of the anime covers it comprehensively to here, followed by season 2 doing the same thing to here. Now, you've seen all this before, but let's add to it. First of all, we're going to mark this section right here at the ending of the Forte block, for reasons you can probably infer, but we'll come back to that later. After that, the first movie, A Clockwork Angeloid, adapted to here, which leads us to Eternal My Master, which decided to adapt this, the ending of the manga. Now, if you have working eyes and a similarly functioning brain, you might already be seeing the problem here. They skipped all of this, and I assure you it wasn't just beach episodes and Mikako tournaments. A lot happens in the intervening time that is crucial to understanding the last few chapters, which, obviously, that's how fucking stories work. I'd liken it to deleting The Empire Strikes Back from the original Star Wars trilogy, and then trying to pretend that A New Hope and Return of the Jedi stitched together work as a standalone narrative. But if that was all that was wrong with the structure of the movie, it would still be relatively simple to unpack in a video. Just do a quick summary of what they skipped and then proceed from there. Well, this is where the graph is about to become a lot more complicated, so hold on to your butts. When I said the movie adapts this final section of the manga, that was a dirty lie, albeit a dirty lie that is easier to understand than the truth, sort of like how they taught you about electrons in school. The more accurate version is that the movie adapts a tiny fraction of the manga's ending, and then spends the rest of its runtime cobbling together random scenes from random chapters. Here, to show you what I mean, let's run through the whole movie again really quick and look at which scenes are from which chapters. So we open up adapting 77, the final chapter. We have about 5-ish minutes of that, before flashing back and opening on a joke from chapter 43. Then we adapt around half of chapter 54, then we get a joke from 60, then a set of scenes from 45, then we go all the way back to chapter 36, then a joke from 39, and then we're back for the other half of 54. That lasts for about 10 minutes, and then we go back and finish off adapting 45. Finally, we flash forward to chapter 77 again, and that lasts for 3 minutes, and then credits. That's Eternal My Master in a nutshell. So, the movie opens on the climax of the manga, providing zero context for it in the process, before then moving on to swing wildly back and forth throughout the entirety of the story's back section, cherry-picking seemingly random scenes to adapt, and then getting bored and moving on to different ones instead, before finally returning to the climax, the intervening section having provided zero additional context, and then ending 5 minutes later. And all of that lasts for 45 minutes, and then we get credits. And yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but it bears repeating. The movie isn't even an hour long. Duh, what's the matter, Kadokawa? Realized you already pulled the 40-minute recap bullshit at the start of the last movie and couldn't do it to pad this one too? So, with all that knowledge, let's return to the overall series graph and erase this bit on the end. The more accurate version has the movie vaguely encompassing the entire second half of the manga, and then starting at 77, then adapting 43, then around half of 54, then a joke from 60, half of 45, then as far back as 36, which we already adapted in the last movie, but fuck it, I guess we're just doing that again. Then we move to 39, and then back to the other half of 45, and then the other half of 54, before finally returning to about 5 minutes of 77. And note that we don't even finish 77. 77, the longest chapter in the entire manga, standing at a towering 106 pages, and the opening and closing moments of the film only bothered to adapt the first 15, meaning there is still 90-odd pages of the final chapter that the movie didn't bother to adapt. Eternal My Master literally ends right in the middle of the climax. Like, imagine if when Luke and Vader are dueling in the climax of episode 6, the movie just smash cut to credits right then and there, and you'd be like, excuse me, but I was kind of fucking watching that! So, all of that being said, our final graph, including Eternal My Master, looks like this. Except it doesn't, because I lied. Again, electrons. So, if we go all the way back over here, you'll remember that we put that little mark on the ending of Forte. And the reason? Why, it's the Continuity Infection's Patient Zero, Chaos, of course. So, if you haven't lobotomized yourself yet like I plan to, you'll recall the unmitigated atrocity that was the ending of Forte. Which, as we discussed in Part 7, occurred because the anime creators moved away from the manga storyline and brought Chaos back to be the final boss fight of Season 2, ending with her turning good and becoming a main character. This was a massive split to the timeline, as it were, because for all of this, Chaos is the villain, the antagonist, who is responsible for driving the vast majority of the plot. As I have said many a time, Forte was the beginning of the end, but it's only now we really see the full ramifications of that. Like, sure, I thought Forte's ending was terrible, but that was mostly because of future knowledge I had of where Chaos's character arc would have gone otherwise. And aside from being the reason why the writers changed Hiyori's powers, her presence was not felt at all in the first movie. Although that came at the cost of literally having to quarantine her to stop the plague that is her new existence from spreading. But that was only ever going to be a stopgap measure, and here and now, the full, terrible consequences of Chaos eating fish are laid bare before us. For example, You ever wonder why the Earth is being destroyed at the start of Eternal My Master? It's pretty prudent as questions go, since the movie never bothers to explain why the fucking climax is happening. And without context, it's kind of fucking weird. Well, to do the movie's job for it, Earth is being destroyed by the Rule, that giant monolith in the synapse, and it's doing that so it can reset the universe and create a new one in its place. And it's doing that because Chaos told it to. And she did that because in a fight with Nymph, she accidentally killed Tomoki and decided the only way to cleanse her sins was to literally restart all of reality. And she was fighting with Nymph because minutes before, she had killed Hiyori, whom Nymph had become friends with, and so was understandably upset about that. And Chaos had killed Hiyori because, etc., you get it. This climax, the Rule resetting the entire universe, is predicated on a sequence of events that can only possibly happen in a world where Chaos is still the villain, which is not a world in which the anime takes place. But the anime adapts it anyway. And as I said, no context is provided for how this is possible, and who activated the Rule if not Chaos, and why they would do that. The creators just decided to adapt it that way because that's how the manga did it, even though this sequence of events is fundamentally impossible in the world the anime is created. If Chaos isn't the villain, if she is indeed a good guy now because of magic, then she never would have killed Hiyori. Not only because Hiyori is dead, but because she would now have no reason to be trying to get smarter by eating people if Tomoki's already accepted her. But it's not like the movie chose to retcon the ending of Forte and just adapt the manga as is, more's the pity, because the second this prologue is over, the movie kicks back into the anime's continuity again. Chaos is here and a good guy, Hiyori's alive, the whole kit and caboodle. But it's assumed that the prologue is a flash forward to the events that follow the ending of the movie, as if these two things fit perfectly together, but they don't. If Chaos didn't kill Hiyori, then she never would have gotten into a fight with Nymph, and so she never would have accidentally stabbed Tomoki, and so she never would have wanted to destroy the world by activating the Rule. So the fact that the movie opens on the world being destroyed by the Rule is a blatant disregard for the continuity that the anime's been building. And not only that, but if Chaos never wanted to activate the Rule, she never would have kidnapped Sugita and forced him to do it. And so he never would have gotten stabbed to the heart, and so he wouldn't have died next to the Rule. But there he is, dying next to the Rule. And if Chaos is still a good guy as of the opening of the film, and she has no reason not to be, then why have Ikaros take Tomoki to the Synapse as the world was ending? Need I remind you that now that Zeus is gone, literally any other angeloid besides Ikaros can come and go from Synapse as they please without exploding. The only reason Ikaros had to do it originally is because everyone else had already died by that point. But we get no word on Astria being dead, Chaos is a good guy now, and Hiyori is apparently alive, and any one of them could have easily flown him there. But of course, I have to stop and remind myself that all of this shit I've come up with is literally pointless, because it's built on the basis of trying in vain to plug the holes and make sense of the opening scene, when it's plain obvious that there is nothing sensical about it. What the filmmakers did was literally ignore all continuity in the anime for the sake of the opening scene, and then only brought it back when it was convenient for them. So, because we have shifted so violently away from the manga story at this point, and yet decided to adapt scenes from that manga that now don't make any sense without the context it provides, to understand the full scope of the movie, we need to add a second timeline onto this graph, denoting which continuity we are currently in. So, once again from the top. The movie opens adapting Chapter 77 in the manga's continuity, before flashing back and moving to the anime's continuity where Chaos is the main character, and then adapting 43, 54, 60, 45, 36, 39, 45, and 54 in order, before shifting back to the manga's timeline to do another few pages of 77, and then ending, suddenly and without warning or narrative coherence. And the movie doesn't offer an explanation for how these two plots are supposed to fit together because it is impossible for them to do so. All of this is presented like it's one big coherent story, as opposed to the reality where it's about 10 separate cut-down, completely incoherent stories, half of which could not possibly coexist with the other half. This movie is broken. That is Eternal My Master, and that is why this script has been a waking fucking nightmare. I had to make sense of this fuck. And that's just the broad strokes. We haven't even started on the specifics of anything, or how the individual scenes are horrible and don't make sense. This fucking movie, it's mind-boggling. It honestly is, in the truest possible sense of the phrase. It's difficult for me to comprehend that someone could make a movie with a structure this disjointed, not on purpose. Like, fuck, if you told me that someone had set out with the goal of making a movie that completely abandoned coherent storytelling, I don't think they could do it this well. Like, at some point their brain would kick in and start to accidentally add structure and identifiable plot points. It's like a bunch of fucking aliens wrote this movie. But it wasn't. It was a bunch of ordinary people like you and me who somehow fucked up the concept of writing so badly that I am honestly impressed they were able to join letters together to make words, and words to make sentences, and somehow do that for long enough to make a fucking movie out of it. Eternal My Master is really, truly an abortion of art. But why? Why a lot of things, mind you? Why this plot? Why this structure? Why did anyone approve the script? Why did anyone think any of this was a good idea? But I want to pull back the whole discussion and start with, what was the intention? What was the goal? What were they thinking? Part 4. Why? I said this back towards the start of the video, but this script has been a nightmare. For a lot of reasons, but chief among them being my inability to tie this movie's production into any kind of understandable narrative. Like, this movie is so bad, so earth-shatteringly atrocious, that there had to be a reason for it, right? Some kind of lens that, when looked through, makes this Cronenberg nightmare make sense. Bad staff, or studio interference, or lack of a budget, or the entire creative team seeing Tomoki's dick and having to erase their memories of how to make art. Something, anything. And my inability to find that lens has been incredibly frustrating. I did it for Clockwork Angeloid, or at least I like to think that I did. That story about AIC being bought and sold back and forth resulting in a half-finished movie is, I think, a pretty good piece of investigative journalism considering my limited resources and the fact that I'm a college kid with literally no experience in the industry. But if my resources were limited back for Clockwork Angeloid, then they are downright non-existent for Eternal My Master. The tricky thing about doing any kind of anime journalism is that it's incredibly difficult to find any kind of insider information. A, because what does exist is all in a different language, and B, because Asian cultures have this thing where they're unnervingly polite all the time, such that they are much more gun-shy about spilling hot goss than their American counterparts. As such, my knowledge base on this front amounts to a total of 5 articles on Anime News Network, none of which are actually helpful in any way. And as much as I wish that they would, the cute anime girls on the sides of the page aren't going to turn towards the screen and reveal the dark industry secrets and juicy production details that I want to know. And so, without more information, I cannot come to any kind of solid, factual conclusion about why this movie is a flaming catastrophe. But the thing about humans is that in the absence of truth, a lie is so much better than nothing at all. Like, back before we knew how rain worked, before science was able to explain evaporation and the water cycle and whatnot, we just said the gods did it. Which was a bad answer, but it was better than no answer. And so, I'm going to present to you my bad answer for why this movie is the way that it is, but I want you guys to know, going in, that I have literally zero evidence for any of this. please take the following with mountainous piles of salt. So the way that I see it, there are three primary motivations behind this movie existing in its current state. First, you have Minazuki and Kadokawa wanting an ad for the manga. Second, you have Production IMS wanting a quick cash grab. And third, you have Chaos denying them of other possibilities. Let's start with that last one, actually. So originally, after Clockwork Angeloid, Kadokawa announced it'd be publishing a third season of the SNO anime, and then 2 years later came back and told us that it had been cancelled and we'd be getting a movie instead. Now, we don't know what happened in that interim, but I'd bet good money on some poor dude sitting down and reading through the manga, trying to string together enough chapters to fill out a third season, only to realize that that was now no longer possible in the anime's continuity post-Chaos eating fish. Because Chaos is so integral to the manga's storyline, not having her as the antagonist ruins basically the entire rest of the plot. Now, of course, you could have just started an anime original plotline instead and gone off from there, but A, now the main characters have Chaos, an unimaginably powerful Angeloid as an ally, which instantly defangs any possible threat. See her non-appearance in Clockwork Angeloid. And B, well, the thing about anime is, sort of counterintuitively, that it isn't a huge moneymaker in Japan. Aside from a scant few original projects and the outlier breakout successes, most of the money in the actual industry comes from associated merchandise sales and from boosting the profile of the manga or light novel which the anime was adapting. Any manga that gets an anime adaptation sees an instant and dramatic uptick of sales, and so far as I am aware, that's actually the main benefit of making an anime to begin with. Which is bizarre to me and my Western sensibilities. Like, imagine if Marvel decided to make Infinity War, not because the movie itself would make money, but because it would boost the profile of the Infinity War comic book, and that's where the real goldmine was. It's weird, and I don't get it, but so far as I'm aware, that is how it works. And so, a third season of the anime that had to deviate so heavily from the manga would be pointless to make, since anyone who came off of that and went, okay, let's go see what the manga's all about, would just be confused. Wait, why is Chaos attacking all the main characters? I thought that magic padlock turned her from bad to good. Why is Hiyori alive when the movie killed her, then unkilled her maybe, and then re-killed her maybe? Why have the plot lines and character motivations suddenly started making sense? That kind of stuff. So I think at some point, someone realized that a third season was no longer tenable, and I think that realization accounts for that 2-year gap of no news. And if that's true, that means Chaos is the reason season 3 was cancelled, which, miraculously, somehow makes the ending of Forte even worse. But then, around late 2013, I think that Minazuki, Production IMS, and Kadokawa saw an opportunity. You see, around that time, Minazuki was gearing up to finally finish the manga. It's around this time that the Harpies exploded, and the manga story was set on a very definitive end path. And as we discussed earlier, what better way to give the manga's climax one last big push than not only by making a movie, and not only by making a movie adapting that ending to the manga, but by making a movie adapting that ending to the manga that ends on an unresolved cliffhanger, which means if you want any sort of closure, guess where you have to go? That's right. I think the purpose of this movie, the entirety of its creation myth, is to be one big fucking ad. And yes, all anime is an ad to some extent, but I think this is more in the vein of a McDonald's commercial ad than the usual bid to sell Blu-rays and figurines. I think all Kadokawa and Minazuki cared about was boosting the profile of the manga's ending. And so they set out to find a studio, any studio really, that could hack out something for as cheap as possible. Like, say for example, one that frequently outsources shit to Korea and has worked with Kadokawa in the past on other similar projects. And you wanna know what else I'd bet happened? I'd bet that IMS's contract with Kadokawa looks something like, make a movie that has scenes adapting the ending of the Heaven's Lost Property manga for as cheap as possible, and the rest was pretty much left up to them. And then I'd bet that two things happened. Someone at IMS did the exact same thing as the last guy and actually read the manga, realized the ending of Forte had fucked everything up, and that actually adapting the ending would not only be nigh on impossible, but also super expensive, because it's full of awesome action scenes and dramatic set pieces. We don't care, says Kadokawa. Adapt the ending of the manga, your budget is $5, make it work. Gee, with the goal of adapting the ending of the manga, purely for the sake of advertising being the one set-in-stone rule hanging over the entire production, that opening action scene adapting the ending of the manga, which incidentally is only about 10% of the movie, but easily over half of what was in the marketing, sure does make a lot more sense. As does the decision to cut away from this exciting and, more importantly, expensive action scene as quickly as possible to instead focus on much cheaper to animate scenes of characters fucking around inside of Tomoki's house. And now that I think about it, that scene of Ikaros flying Tomoki to the Synapse is literally the only part of the ending that doesn't need to acknowledge Chaos's existence. I mean, it does, because none of this should be happening in the first place without her, but it's the only part that does not physically require her presence in the scene, since she's dead by this point in the manga. So while it is incredibly confusing to open a movie on the end of the world with no context, I imagine it would have been even worse to open a movie on the end of the world, and the context being that Chaos turned evil again for no reason, and then decided to kill everyone for no reason. But who cares, says Production IMS. Now we've animated that iconic shot of Ikaros' wings burning, so we have an excuse to show that in every single trailer and make it the focus of half the merchandise. Kadokawa should be happy with that. Now we just need to somehow come up with about an hour and 20 minutes of filler, before Kadokawa coughs awkwardly and points out that they've already used $3.50 of their $5 budget. Okay, never mind, says IMS. I guess we'll take some shearing scissors to the runtime. It's still a movie even if it's only 40 minutes long, right? So, with all of that, we get an opening action scene that adapts the ending of the manga, purely so that a scene of that happening is technically there, and now we can put it in the trailers and raise public awareness of the manga's ending, which is all Kadokawa cared about. Followed by 40 minutes of filler to bring this up to the minimum viable product instead of a 10-minute commercial. That way IMS can make money off tickets and Blu-ray sales. And then another 3 minutes of advertising for the manga, which ends on a cliffhanger. So now you have to go by that to understand what the fuck just happened. Wow! Suddenly, all of these bizarre structural problems and mind-bending creative decisions make perfect sense. Now, again, that was all naught but glorified fanfiction, and I might very well be completely wrong on all accounts, but viewing the movie through this lens accomplishes a couple of things. It lets me move on with my life, satisfied that I have some reason for why this movie is the way that it is, and it confirms that this movie is the functional product of people with warped intentions, rather than the dysfunctional product of someone who was so mind-bendingly incompetent they actually thought any part of this would be a good idea. Part 5. The Art, or Lack Thereof. By the way, this review is now longer than the movie. So, that's it for most of the big macro stuff, and now I can really start to dig down into the specifics of why the movie sucks. So, first up, I've said a couple of times already that I think the movie looks like shit, but I've yet to really prove it. Now, the art was actually a pretty big deal in the run-up to this movie's release, because, as you may have noticed, the character designs in Eternal My Master look nothing like they used to, and if you didn't, you almost certainly did on one of the many occasions the movie does a flashback and uses old clips. And incidentally, it was already an insanely jarring contrast when Clockwork Angeloid did that, but when Eternal My Master does it, after having changed art styles, it becomes downright surreal. But, to throw Eternal My Master a bone, I was looking forward to this new art style after I saw the first trailer. Oh, what's that? You don't believe me? Well, we're actually far enough now into the history of SNO that I was making videos around this time. So, here's a clip from the trailer first impressions that I did, 6 years ago now. Speaking of which, the new animation style looks gorgeous. It's a lot more simplistic and stylized than either Season 1 or Forte, but I think it looks a lot nicer. See? Positivity! And shitty microphone quality, but still positivity. To be clear, I do love the arts in Seasons 1 and 2, but like Past Me was just sort of getting at, Season 1's designs especially were a lot more complex than their manga counterparts, with more detail, pointed edges, and thicker black outlines. Of course, I think the incredible use of lighting and dynamic camera angles, still to this day make a lot of Season 1 just gorgeous to look at, but even so, the character designs especially aren't aging as well as the rest of it is. Season 2 then went a long way towards improving Season 1's designs while still making the two compatible, with brighter colors and thinner outlines. And of the many, many problems I had with Clockwork Angeloid, the art was never one of them. So, while a style change wasn't necessarily required, because the old one was perfectly fine, I was pretty interested in this new one, because it's a lot closer to the art style that Minazuki uses in the manga. Simpler, less complex character models, with much softer edges and thinner brown outlines. What a cool idea! Of course, in retrospect, I now see this as a naive dream. When actually watching the movie, something very quickly becomes apparent. Oh, they changed the art style to save on money. All that crap I just said about bringing things more in line with the manga, well, while that may have been a happy accident, at this point I think it's way more likely this was a result of the budget first and foremost. Like, yes, the more painterly style does look more like the manga, but I doubt it's a coincidence that it's also massively easier to draw. A big problem with the original, more detailed style was that if you didn't draw it properly, or it was a rushed job, it was incredibly obvious. And if you want an example of that, look no further than Project Pink, the OVA. It's a good episode, but oh lord, the characters look less than stellar here. Throughout the entire episode, they're just constantly going off-model, such that I think they look more like they're from K-On! Season 1 than SNO Season 1. Meanwhile, in Eternal My Master, using these simpler designs means that they can go off-model without people noticing more than they otherwise could. And even then, if you pay the slightest bit of attention, you'll notice that this movie is fugly as hell most of the time. Granted, there are a couple of nice shots, very conveniently the ones that happen to appear in the trailer, but a good 80% of the movie bounces between acceptable for a TV anime and bad even for a TV anime. Like, even setting aside the CGI for the time being, so many shots are just poorly drawn, incompetently framed, badly paced, or use incredibly obvious cheats to avoid actually having to animate things. Like, what should be a cool bit of motion gets turned into a shitty panning shot. It's just a worse drawn version of the original manga panel. The proverbial camera for this movie so often just floats around completely unmotivated, or cuts between shot, reverse shot, and in some of the worst cases, things don't look like they were framed at all. For example, here's a 7-second scene where the angle is completely fucked, so Ikaros, the subject of the scene, has the entire upper half of her body cut off. Or, here's a 10-second shot where everyone's faces have like half the amount of detail that they should, and also, since we don't actually want to draw Mikako, let's just hide her entire body behind her hair, which unintentionally makes her look like Grimace in the process. You can also see that they added a terrible looking gradient to the wall here, so that it was a bit more interesting than just a gray wall, which is a trick they use constantly. And pro tip, that's a really easy way to spot an anime with terrible art earlier on, when they throw an unholy amount of post-processing effects, lens flares, Gaussian blurs, speed lines, gradients, etc. onto the background. Because those are really easy ways of making a flat, lifeless image appear to have more going on in it at first glance. Exhibit A. Check out this scene where they added speed lines, a bunch of rainbow bullshit, and screen shake to disguise the fact this is an 8-second poorly framed shot with very little actual movement in it. And the poor quality of the animation and art is particularly galling to me, not only because by this point in the manga, Suma Nezuki's art was approaching god tier, but because the wacky comedy set pieces of SNO were a constant uphill battle in the manga, because he was having to convey frenetic, high-energy comedy scenes with still panels. And so surely getting to see all of that comedy finally in motion would be the main selling point of the anime adaptation in the first place. After all, things like flying panties, or a shooting festival, or Ikaros trying to smack Tomoki with a fly swatter are just so much funnier in motion than they would be in still pictures. And yet, the movie, despite ostensibly being animated, somehow feels more stiff and lifeless than the actual still panels of the manga. A great example, this scene, where Tomoki is being chased around by Ikaros. He thinks he's gotten away, but she's always just behind him. A classic Looney Tunes gag. What's fun about this scene in the manga is that when Ikaros appears next to him, Tomoki first pounces back on his hind legs like a cat, and then not just jumps, but pirouettes through the window. As your eyes scan across this image from right to left, you get two different Tomokis performing two different actions, each of which lead perfectly into each other, as well as being well drawn and appropriately over the top, making even this still image seem frenetic and exciting. Meanwhile, here's the same cut in the movie. A bus with way too many fucking gradients, the omnipresent speed lines appear to try and cheat the feeling of motion, and then a cut to Ikaros with flat colors and zero shading, which makes her look completely fake on top of the incredibly over-detailed background. Tomoki sits there for 3 seconds, then jumps up in a 2-frame animation, with the same horrible-looking wide-eyed, surprised expression that he has for the entire scene, and then not so much jumps out the window as he does rotates, like he's been stapled to a clock hand going in reverse. Or we have the big final emotional scene where Tomoki and Ikaros are fighting. Calling what happens here animation feels like an insult to animators who actually give a shit. I love the shot of him falling, which is literally a JPEG being dragged across the screen, which they apparently liked enough to use twice in a row. Or this shot of him reacting to falling, which they apparently liked enough to use twice in a row. Or this shot of Ikaros, quote-unquote, catching him, which is literally a still image moving back and forth. And again, this is the big final action scene. The moment upon which the emotional story of the movie has, allegedly, spent its entire runtime telling, and it looks like dog shit. And speaking of this scene, another issue related to the art is that the creators of this movie obviously had no idea when it was appropriate to have the characters drawn normally versus when to make them chibi. When Ikaros throws Tomoki here, he's still full-sized in the movie, whereas he wasn't in the manga, and that one small but crucial change turns this from a comedy scene into something resembling torture porn. As she throws him out of frame for the second time, all I can think of is, Jesus Christ, Ikaros, even Minos wouldn't be this fucking evil. I don't remember being bothered by this scene in the manga, but it's so uncomfortable here, because Tomoki is literally being tortured, threatened with death, if he doesn't do as Ikaros says, and most of that feeling comes from the creators not telling us through the art that this was supposed to be a slapstick comedy moment, and that there wasn't any real danger. But my favorite example of this by far is the opening scene, where after being awoken by Ikaros about to kiss him, Tomoki sucker punches the shit out of her. Like, look at this. He's been drawn so that he actually looks demented. Because they didn't make him a chibi character in this shot, the effect of the scene is no longer, oh, those two rascals, but instead, holy shit, calm the fuck down, Tomoki! And then there's the CGI, and oh boy, how could we forget about the CGI? CGI that does not integrate at all into the rest of the animation, and looks like it was rendered on a bathroom scale. And again, I'm not against the concept. Season 1 used CGI all the fucking time. The hyperfusion panty robot, that was CGI. The orchestra was CGI. The flying panties themselves were CGI. But you want to know what the difference is between that and this? Effort! Check it. Did you notice that the gymnasium in episode 1 was CGI? I would bet probably not. A ton of effort obviously went into lighting it properly, so that it integrates well into the surrounding environment, and so feels like it's actually there. They put a Gaussian blur on it to make it less obviously CGI, and they actually make the most of it. Because it's CGI, they can get really artful shots like this, where there are a ton of disparate moving parts that you don't usually get in TV anime, because it will take an eternity to draw that way. And not only does it just look cool, but this is after Tomoki's accidentally wished to kill everyone on Earth, and so framing him through the bars like this symbolically represents how he feels trapped, helpless, and like the walls are closing in around him. And then, only once Ikaros is promised to stay with him, does the camera pan forward, allowing the bars to open up again, symbolically freeing him. So not only does it look good because they gave a shit and put in the effort to make it look good, but it's a cost-effective way of getting a really cool shot. A shot that is a massive improvement to the tone of the scene and helps to simultaneously tell the story through the fucking camera work. But in Eternal My Master, it's a lazy cheat. It's a lazy cheat so they don't have to animate shit. This scene in the manga, where the rule is dissolving the entire universe, is, I'd argue, the most gorgeous scene Minazuki has ever drawn. Ikaros tells us that the rule is recreating the entire universe, and that its first step is to erase everything except for the synapse itself. Humans, animals, plants, continents, oceans, the sky, everything will disappear. As we see the rule, which in every prior appearance has been framed with a holy reverence, but always shrouded in darkness, for the first time aglow with a pure white. And that light, that energy erupting from it, extends up and up, so bright that it casts a shadow under the platform it's sitting on, until it circles around the entire galaxy, as we see New York City, London dissolving, the very planet and the moon beside it being torn away piece by piece. In the movie, it's a fucking CGI effect, an incredibly shitty CGI effect that boils down to a clipping mask removing the layer of land on top to reveal the layer of black underneath, and it looks fucking terrible, such that I cannot imagine a worse way of adapting this scene. Again, either this movie had zero budget, or the people making it gave zero shits, or were incompetent, or possibly some combination of the three. Granted, this movie comes to us from Production IMS, who aren't usually regarded as bastions of quality at the best of times, but honestly, I'm willing to lean towards zero budget to explain this. But here's the thing, this isn't a TV anime where that excuse can work. This was a theatrically released movie that you had to pay real money to even see, and the expectations for what anime movies are supposed to look like go up to and including stuff like Your Name, Redline, and Kizumonogatari. NEETs all over Japan had to leave their rooms, drive to the cinema, and then spend money on tickets and their entire college tuition on popcorn for the privilege of getting to see art and animation that looks like it came fresh from the Asterisk War. Part 6. Adaptation Hell. Here it is, folks, the part of the video where we finally go through the movie and compare the scenes to their manga counterparts. Or it would be, but I don't want to be here literally forever, so let's choose one specific scene to really focus in on the micro side of things, and then we can go over the more broad macro generalizations for the rest of it. And what better scene to break down than literally the first one? So this opening scene, in terms of an adaptation, is honestly fascinating, because they adapt it just about scene for scene, line for line, almost literally down to the last speech bubble. But because no one making this movie had any idea what the fuck they were doing, each part of it comes across like it was described to the scriptwriter after being put through a game of telephone. For example, let's start with the animation. Why does Tomoki barely seem to care when he learns about Nymph's death?
Oi, masaka.
In the manga, and get used to hearing that phrase again, Tomoki looks at Ikaros, her face hidden in shadows and tilted down sorrowfully, and then asks, "Hey, are you saying?" And Ikaros confirms it by shaking her head on the verge of tears. And Tomoki, actually bursting into tears, chokes on his words, trying to get them out, and then yells, "Take me to Synapse!" Look at the raw emotion in his face here. He's almost entirely covered in shadow. There are tears in his eyes, and furious at his own powerlessness, he extends an arm to Ikaros, begging her to help him. In the movie, he's just slightly annoyed, and then casually asks to go to Synapse. Like, Srichira Hoshi is trying, bless his heart, but they just don't have the animation to back any of it up. And then we can look at Ikaros' line, where she agrees to take Tomoki to the Synapse. You see, the thing is, Tomoki doesn't know it, but he's essentially asked her to kill herself, since approaching Synapse without permission means she'll die. And look at how good manga Ikaros' expression here is. Her entire face, again, completely covered by shadow, eyes wide, mouth agape, both shocked at Tomoki's furor and scared at the prospect of her own death. But seeing Tomoki's determination and realizing they are out of options, she pauses for a second before hanging her head sorrowfully and agreeing. But then in the movie, she's just like, sure, why the fuck not? What's more, for the last 2 pages of the manga, the proverbial camera has been getting closer and closer, zooming in more and more with each panel to further capture the character's emotions. But this scene in the movie actually cuts from a close-up of Tomoki's mouth to a wide shot where you can barely see his expression, and then again to a wider shot even further away. Tell me, what do you think Tomoki and Ikaros are feeling right now, judging by this shot, compared to what they're thinking judging by this shot? And God, this just gets worse and worse. So, as they approach Synapse, Ikaros tells him that she's dying. The same page in the manga opens on a silent shot of them flying and her wings burning. Tomoki repeats what she just said back to her, obviously in shock, and Ikaros confirms it with a silent, deadly serious look. And Tomoki bursts out laughing, accentuated here by the light and fluffy speech bubbles. Then, as he looks down, his eyes completely covered in shadow, he says, I can't believe you joke about that at a time like this. I never can predict what you'll do next. Turn back! This is an incredibly difficult thing to pull off correctly, because it's a joke in the middle of Ikaros' death scene. That kind of thing requires an incredible amount of writing talent, finesse, and deliberateness with each shot, each expression, and each line delivery to make those two things not conflict with each other. And I think that Minazuki does it here incredibly well, which I'd attribute mainly to 2 things. Number 1, the incredible art. Both Tomoki and Ikaros are constantly bathed in shadow here, and the sky behind them is a chaotic mess of blacks. In addition, their facial features are spot on, with each shot perfectly demonstrating what they're feeling at that exact moment. Tomoki's shock at her reveal, Ikaros' sorrowful and silent confirmation, and then the seriousness with which he yells at her to turn back. In addition, the one panel where Tomoki starts laughing is the only one where they aren't in darkness. For a brief second, their faces are in light again, but her wings and the sky are still as black as they were. Number 2, the writing quality. Writing-wise, this set of panels accomplishes a couple of things. It's on one hand a joke, a small bit of tension relief, so that this incredibly dark chapter isn't just 100% dark and gritty the whole way through, which I think is a good thing. But it's also a powerful character moment. Tomoki has just lost so many other people. Hiyori, Sohora, Suguta, Nymph, Astria, Chaos, all killed in quick succession. And now Ikaros, the girl who has been at his side for years, the one he literally broke down in tears in front of and begged her not to leave him alone, is now dying and leaving him alone. Understandably, this takes a few seconds to process, and as he does so, Tomoki tries to dissolve the tension with a joke, but it's important to note that he's being rhetorical here. He doesn't actually think Ikaros is joking, as evidenced by how grim his face is. He's just buying himself a few extra seconds to think about what he's going to do, which he does immediately by yelling, "Go back!" Thus, in addition to being a tension dissolve for the audience, it's also a tension dissolve for Tomoki's character in-universe, and so it doesn't feel out of place or unnatural. And to the contrary, even, seeing Tomoki default back to humor to deal with this horrible situation is an incredibly humanizing moment for his character, and a very relatable thing to see. So that's why I would say this scene not only works, but is a fantastic example of how to blend these two disparate elements together in aid of making the scene stronger. Now, let's look at how the movie does it.
なんだってお前が燃え尽きるこんな時に冗談とか相変わらずわけわかんねえやつだなお前は引き返せ
Okay, so fucking, everything about this is wrong. Again, like I said earlier, the best possible way to describe this shit is it's like the manga was explained to the scriptwriter through a game of telephone. The key bits are all here, almost all the lines are verbatim what they were in the manga, but the only way I can imagine the manga being adapted like this is if the animators had never actually read it. So, first of all, this is an animated movie. The creators had unprecedented control over the visual aesthetic when compared to literally any other medium, and they chose to set the end of the world during a bright, sunny day. In the manga, this scene is incredibly harshly lit, consisting almost completely of inky blacks and with white being used only to accentuate the harshness of things like fire or the character expressions, while implying that the background literally doesn't even exist anymore. And in the movie, it's just a pretty day outside. I mean, like a lot of other things with the film, you can tell it's like this because the budget was $2, but as with Hiyori's death in Clockwork Angeloid, it's incredible how much tension just instantly drains from everything about this because the color direction is non-existent. And speaking of the budget, what the heck is up with Ikaros' wings here? They're supposed to be on fire, but the best way they had to illustrate that was to have them sparking constantly. And they hang on this fucking hideous shot for 11 seconds straight, and then after cutting the Ikaros' face, we cut back to it again! This is not the kind of shot that can carry a full 15 seconds of your theatrical film, Kadokawa. And hey, just for funsies, let's pop over to Kizumonogatari and see what fire looks like in that theatrical film. But picking on the shitty animation and art direction almost feels like small potatoes compared to how badly they messed up the character positioning and close-ups. I'd like to point out that as Ikaros explains to Tomoki that she is dying, not once do they look at each other, as compared to the manga where they never stop looking at each other. That's because they're having what's known in the human world as a conversation, and a pretty serious one at that. And conversations start to feel kind of awkward and unnatural when the two participants are both staring off into space. Next, they actually cut the line where Tomoki laughs at Ikaros' reveal, and yet keep in the lines immediately after, where he, again rhetorically, says that it was a joke.
お前が燃え尽きるこんな時に冗談とか相変わらずわけわかんねえやつだなお前は引き返せ
So, not only does that defeat the purpose of having the scene in the first place, to add a moment of levity to an incredibly serious moment, as well as humanizing Tomoki's character, but by electing to not also cut the following lines, Tomoki now just looks like an idiot who actually thinks Ikaros is joking. Like, Nymph just died and the world is ending, but apparently anime Tomoki is dense enough that he actually thinks Ikaros is kidding in a situation like this? Of course not, but by removing the initial line of dialogue and all the facial expressions conveying extra meaning, that's what it comes across like. And we're still not done here, because after they fuck up the line about thinking it was a joke, they cut back to the exact same shot of Ikaros' face that we saw 5 seconds ago, because once again, no budget, and then there's a solid 5 seconds of awkward silence before Tomoki remembers his line.
こんな時に冗談とか相変わらずわけわかんねえやつだなお前は引き返せ
That's fucking terrible. Pacing. I can't believe you joke about that at a time like this, and turn back are supposed to be part of the same conversation, but by pausing for 5 seconds in between the lines, it makes it feel like it's actually 2 separate thoughts.
こんな時に冗談とか相変わらずわけわかんねえやつだなお前は
And finally, and worst of all, the animation on the character expressions is dog shit. Ikaros, while explaining that she is going to die, looks more like she just found out someone ate her leftovers in the refrigerator, and Tomoki only looks mildly concerned instead of like his entire world is falling apart, which it actually literally is. Here, a side-by-side comparison. Here's his face in the manga as Ikaros tells him that she is dying, and here's the exact same panel adapted in the movie. And to put the cherry on top of the shit sundae, we don't see Tomoki's face as he tells her to turn back.
引き返せ
The build-up to Tomoki's expression in the manga was literally the point of the entire page before it, and yet they don't show it to us in the anime. Fucking terrible adaptation. It's honestly astonishing how butchered this scene is, and how it doesn't work from every single angle. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that it isn't just this one scene. The entire movie is like this. I've only brought it up here this extensively to prove the point, and even though I'm going to have to zoom out and focus on the more macro writing issues, rather than doing a panel-by-panel comparison for the entire movie, my point is that sure, I've spent like 15 minutes talking about 10 lines of dialogue in 30 seconds of the film, but you could literally do this with any section of the film. Every scene, every shot, and every line of dialogue is just as disjointed and broken as the segment we've covered here today. So, on a more macro side of things, the biggest issue with the movie's middle section is that it's a human centipede of about 15 different chapters of the manga. Now, that said, some are used more than others. For example, chapter 44 is brought in for that joke of Ikaros burning her mouth, and then dropped again 5 seconds later. But the bulk of what you might generously call the plot of the film is made up of a mishmash of chapters 45 and 54. So, chapter 45 is about Tomoki undoing Ikaros' imprinting because he thinks that's what's stopping her from being able to smile. And chapter 54 is about Ikaros going on a date with Tomoki, except it's actually an imposter angeloid sent by Minos. I'm not going to read over those chapters here as I did with 46 and 47 in Let's Talk About Chaos, because frankly, this video is long enough. But I will be making reference to them, so it might be worth your time to go read/reread those chapters before I start. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't at least understand how someone could see a possible connection between 45 and 54, because, on a surface level, both are concerned with Tomoki and Ikaros' relationship. And, funnily enough, both chapters end by introducing the new big villain we'll be focusing on in the coming arc. And while both chapters are fantastic, and on many people's lists of the best chapters in the entire manga, the problem is that upon closer inspection, both of these chapters have different intentions driving them. 45 is, I'd say, mainly about developing Tomoki and Ikaros' relationship, and then just happens to introduce chaos at the end because it was a convenient time to do so. Whereas Chapter 54 is primarily focused on introducing the new villain, and does that by way of Tomoki and Ikaros' relationship. And as a result of having those different intentions, these two chapters are not compatible. But, of course, that wasn't going to stop Production IMS. So, probably one of the worst things in the whole movie is them undoing the awesome twist at the end of Chapter 54. As I said, the chapter is, at first glance, about Ikaros getting jealous of Tomoki spending time with Nymph and Astria, and trying to get Tomoki to go somewhere with her alone. But while this is happening, what it might take you until the reread to notice is that Ikaros is acting kind of strangely. Specifically, like how she did back in Chapter 1, before she had any character development. She's disregarding all the stuff about being human she's learned. She's, again, unaware of her sexuality, and acts with reckless abandon in pursuit of her goals. And Tomoki comments on this a lot, saying, "Man, Ikaros sure is acting strangely today, quite a bit." And, of course, the end of the chapter twist is that it wasn't Ikaros. Minos created a copycat angeloid to infiltrate and kill Tomoki. And what I love about rereading this chapter, knowing it isn't Ikaros, it not only makes so much more sense, but is also a ridiculously clever and subtle continuation of the theme that Minos is his own worst enemy. In recreating Ikaros, Minos continued to be so unwilling to see angeloids as living, thinking creatures that he, seemingly without even thinking about it, made this new Ikaros act exactly like the old one that he knew, with no regard for how she's changed in the meantime. And it's because of this disconnect that his plan doesn't work. The clone isn't able to get Tomoki alone because he keeps running away from her. And after Tomoki sees the real Ikaros lying near death on the floor, the clone is then forced to try and kill him right then and there, in front of Astria and Nymph, who are able to eventually stop her. There's this great moment when Tomoki and clone Ikaros are flying together, where Tomoki says, "Put me down!" and she goes, "Okay," and lets him fall. I think that's the best moment for comparing this incomplete clone with the real thing, because there's a very similar scene in Chapter 77, where Tomoki, while flying with Ikaros, not only says, "Put me down," but orders her to do so. And this actual Ikaros, after having gone through all this character development, disobeys that order. So 54 not only brilliantly sets up the new villain of the arc, but acts as a sort of meta mirror to reflect the old Ikaros back at the audience, so we can clearly see just how far she's come. The movie disregards this twist entirely, so now it's actually just Ikaros the whole time. Other than apathy, I have no idea how anyone involved with this movie okayed this script. So, the idea now is that Mikako hacked Ikaros and made her more assertive, which is already an incredibly weak throwaway line, attempting to justify and mesh this plotline where it absolutely does not belong, but even that doesn't cover their ass for everything. For example, they keep in the scene where Ikaros lets Tomoki fall, which is absolutely not something the real Ikaros would do, hacking or not. And so, all of these scenes are now just retcon to her acting wildly out of character for no fucking reason. And, of course, this change ruins 45, too. The whole point of that chapter is that Tomoki and Ikaros are in a relationship, but both are so fucking bad at relationships, they just can't communicate with each other. Both characters only want what is best for the other, but they have such difficulty talking to each other that conflict arises regardless. Tomoki wants Ikaros to be able to smile, and so, without telling her about it, orders her to erase their imprinting. And to quote myself from an earlier episode of The Love Letter, Tomoki views the chain as something holding her back, but Ikaros views the chain as the thing connecting the two of them together, and so, conflict. But Ikaros is also too much of a spurg to tell him this, and so she just gets really passive-aggressive about it, which Tomoki again misinterprets. Things are only resolved when Mikako takes control of the situation and orders Ikaros to throw Tomoki into the ocean. When questioned about why she did that, she accurately points out that Ikaros has a history of only being able to speak her mind when Tomoki's life was in danger. And so, Ikaros is finally able to tell Tomoki that she hates that he erased the imprinting, and he realizes how much he fucked up and restores it. And so, a problem that arose from a lack of communication is solved by communication, and both characters learn a lesson. Really good chapter. But in the movie, by spot welding this plotline to 54's, we get scenes where Ikaros is speaking her mind, quite clearly telling Tomoki again and again that she wants to restore the imprinting, but he just runs away. Not because anything about that is in character for him, but because he ran away in chapter 54 despite the situation being completely different. There, he ran away because clone Ikaros kept saying, "We should go somewhere where we can be alone," and he thought she was trying to fuck him, but here she's saying, "Please be my master again," which is not something he would run away from.
一緒にいたいんです。もう一度私のマスターに。もう一度私のマスターに。もう一度私の。もう一度私のマスターになってください。
And that means that when Mikako orders her to throw Tomoki into the ocean with the intention of that order making Ikaros more honest, it doesn't work because she's been honest with how she feels all fucking day. These changes have the unintended consequence of making Tomoki look like a huge dick for just ignoring Ikaros' desperate requests, and it makes Mikako look like an idiot for doing a thing that didn't work the last 10 times they tried it. But it gets even worse, because if we disregard all knowledge of the manga, we have this movie's Tomoki constantly repeating that he does not want to be imprinted to Ikaros, basically getting bullied by every character involved until he relents. And this discomfort comes to a head in the scene where Ikaros tosses him and lets him fall before catching him at the last second. What was, in the manga, a fun comedy scene where Ikaros tries to deal with her inability to communicate is here recontextualized as an incredibly fucking hard-to-watch scene where Tomoki gets his life threatened repeatedly until he gives in to Ikaros' demands. This is why 45 and 54 do not fit together, and whatever twat racket approved this script should be tossed down a hole filled with angry mice. Those are the big problems at the heart of the movie, and while there is a mountain of other botched adaptation stuff I could touch on, I'll leave that as an exercise for the viewer. Part 7. The top 10 worst characters. There's only 10 characters, by the way. So, let's talk about all the characters in the movie and why all of them are fucked. For convenience's sake, let's go in order of least fucked to most fucked. Number 10. Daedalus. She's only in the movie for 10 seconds and has 2 lines of dialogue, so it's pretty difficult to ruin her. That said, the movie does make a spirited attempt by putting her back into the stuffy, darkly lit bedroom of her manga counterpart, instead of the bullshit cartoon science lab she had in Forte. I honestly have no idea why Daedalus is in this film, aside from so she can feel sad while Ikaros is freaking out about being a weapon, but she really is pointless. You could edit all of her scenes out of the film, and nothing would change. Number 9. Sahora. Fitting that these two are right next to each other. Unlike Daedalus, Sahora is actually in quite a bit of the film, but she spends her time mainly in the background, while the more interesting characters take the spotlight. She essentially has the same role as Finn in the later sequel trilogy Star Wars movies, in that she runs the places with everyone else and then stands around in the background, while the more developed characters actually say and do things. Number 8. Suguta. Sugata mainly spends the runtime dealing with all the new bullshit canon the movie introduces, trying to contrive Hiyori back into the plot, but none of that is really out of character for him, so he escapes relatively unscathed, again by virtue of avoiding being inside the script's spotlight. Number 7. Mikako. Here is where we really start to go downhill. So, Mikako gets retconned into being a millennia-old angel from Synapse in the movie. You might think I'd be angry about that, but honestly, I'm more just bewildered. I mean, the thing is, Minazuki fucked this up too. It's the same thing he does with Pele in Plunderer. Minazuki's got no idea what's up with her, what her story is, or if she's important to the plot in some hidden way, but he might think of something later, so he just sprinkles in a bunch of foreshadowing where she acts strangely, or things involving her don't quite add up, which are all vague and generic enough to have supported literally anything he could have ever wanted to do with her later. And I do mean literally anything. For example, Mikako is a carbon copy of an angel in the Synapse. There's foreshadowing for that. Mikako is a human, but still has some nebulous connection to the Synapse. There's foreshadowing for that. Mikako is literally a Haruhi-style god in human form. There's foreshadowing for that. Mikako is an alien from the planet Glorp 7. There's foreshadowing for that. Unfortunately, by the end, Minazuki gave us no answer, which is one of the bigger criticisms I have of the manga's writing. He never did think of an interesting twist involving her, and so that plotline is dropped, and all the prior foreshadowing is either rendered completely pointless or comes down solely to individual interpretation. Which means the question of, is there something interesting happening with Mikako, is answered with, well, do you want there to be? So as a result of this being one of the manga's bigger fuck-ups as well, I'd probably be inclined to just accept whatever this movie told me as canon, but the answer they have is fucking stupid. Mikako is an angel. Nothing about that is explained or makes any sense. So the timeline of events is that past angel Mikako caused Ikaros to malfunction, which led her to getting found by Mini Tomoki, and then to the Synapse being destroyed. Now, we know that Ikaros was acting under official orders from Minos in this scene, so why would another angel do this? Disable their most powerful weapon and send it crashing down to the surface? Is Angel Mikako part of, like, a rebel faction inside the Synapse? And if so, should we maybe get some scenes exploring that? And did she even know that hacking Ikaros would cause the destruction of the Synapse? Like, was that her plan all along, or just an accident? And either way, how would she not have been killed after this? By endangering every single angel's life, Mikako would have become priority number 1 on Minos' kill list. And if the explanation is that she's on the run now, Minos might have even gone so far as to use the rule to just wish her out of existence, lest one of her genocide plans actually succeed next time. So then the question we have to ask is the Mikako on the surface that we know a carbon copy of this angel, or the angel herself? Option 1 means she would have been let back into Synapse after she almost killed everyone, which wouldn't happen. And option 2 means that she's on the run and sawed her own wings off, and then led a life as a human for thousands of years, culminating now in somehow managing to have passed herself off as a daughter of the local Yakuza's leader, very conveniently in the exact same part of the world that Ikaros randomly happened to crash into. Except even that doesn't work, because Sugata has memories of the two of them when they were little, and he'd probably have had questions if she hadn't aged a day since then. So, nothing about this is explained or makes any sense. It's a bullshit retcon to try and cram chapters 45 and 54 together by hacking Ikaros so she would act wildly out of character, because it's actually supposed to be an imposter angeloid and not the real Ikaros. My head hurts, let's move on. Number 6. Hiyori. Oh boy, everyone's favorite character? So, yes, Hiyori is alive, which means I have to ask, how? How the fuck? How the fuck do you explode in the last movie and then just reappear in this one like nothing happened? Fuck it, play the Simpsons clip you all know is coming.
I thought you were dead. Nope.
Now, I obviously know that there was that scene after the credits of the last movie, but that was so vague and stapled on at the last second that I just figured it was a bone thrown to all the Rabbit Hiyori fanboys that don't exist. But does Hiyori being alive in Eternal My Master not completely invalidate the sad ending of the last movie? Like, what the fuck was the point of ending that on everyone crying and playing sad music over the credits if she just shows up in this movie acting no more put out than if she just made a quick trip to the fucking store? Now, the movie does attempt an explanation, but it's during that 10-minute long exposition scene where my eyes start to glaze over, and you can't tell if something is stupid because of the script or the translation. So, you'll have to forgive me if I accidentally get something wrong while trying to climb Mount Bullshit. So, what I've got to work with is thus. Hiyori says, and I quote, "When I disappeared from this world and was wandering between dimensions, I saw many parallel worlds and different time axes." So, apparently the spatio-temporal buffer being completely annihilated dumps you into the backstage of the multiverse, and you can just wander from dressing room to dressing room, peeking in at different parallel realities. Okay, really quick, let me try and channel the spirit of the intended audience for this crap. Okay, cool. All of that made sense. Next, while she was floating in this time soup, no doubt high-fiving the cast of Plunder along the way, she saw a bunch of parallel realities that have been created and destroyed by Synapse, except that's not how it works. Synapse doesn't create different dimensions when they use the rule, they just delete everything in the galaxy and then rebuild it. Whatever, might be a translation issue, I said to myself. Except no, because the very next thing she says is, and the really weird thing is that Tomoki didn't exist in any other universe except for ours. And wow, that is a whole new level of stupid. Okay, so what happens in the manga is that Synapse deletes and then rebuilds the galaxy. What I thought happened in the movie was they were just changing it to Synapse deletes and then rebuilds the dimension. But no, what she is actually saying is that there's one timeline, just Earth, and there are a bunch of parallel universe Earths that were destroyed by Synapse eventually, and that Tomoki only exists on this one timeline. What the fuck? Why are you changing so much shit? What's even the point? So, this movie confirms the SNO multiverse? Why the hell is Tomoki only in this universe? Why is he special now on a multiversal level when the whole point in the manga was that he wasn't special in any way? And why can Hiyori travel to different dimensions if she's a time angeloid, apparently? And if Hiyori can do it, powered by her own Synapse technology, then obviously the Synapse can do it as well, right? So, have they? Hiyori talks like the dimensions are exactly in sync, since the only difference is Tomoki. But surely, since every Synapse in every timeline would know what every other Synapse in every other timeline was doing, that would cause every dimension to desync right there. And if going to different dimensions is an option now, then why doesn't Minos bring together a huge multiversal think tank to build his next Angeloid? Surely 20 of him put together could build something that'd kill Ikaros. Or during the big final fight, when the universe is ending, why don't they just go get 100 Nymph and Astrias to fight Chaos? Or what about 5 already turned good Chaoses to fight Chaos? Why the fuck am I having to think about this? Oh, right, it's essentially a bunch of technobabble to justify Hiyori being back in the movie so we can sell body pillows. Right. Numbers 5 and 4. Tomoki and Ikaros. So, we discussed at great length in the last segment why these two are fucking terrible in this movie, so I won't repeat myself too much here. Suffice it to say, both Tomoki and Ikaros act wildly out of character in this movie, as a result of trying to mesh two completely different chapters into one story. Now, the only thing I haven't really mentioned yet is this bizarre scene towards the end of the film, where Ikaros suddenly flips from crying about the imprinting to freaking out about being a weapon. And the last movie had a lot of this too, thinking about it, but didn't we already solve this? Like, that was the big Season 1 climax, the conclusion of Ikaros' Iron Giant arc. Tomoki found out Ikaros was a weapon, but he said he didn't care because she was so many other things besides just a weapon. And he even said, right now, I'm glad you're a weapon because that means you can save Nymph. And then, like, in Forte, it's just not a big deal anymore. She'll occasionally use Artemis or have a fight with Chaos, but everyone seems pretty chill about it. So why the fuck is she having a panic attack about it here? This is the part of the movie I legitimately just don't understand. Like, if I missed a line of dialogue or something, please let me know, because this random character regression is just bizarre. Numbers 3 and 2. Nymph and Astria. And by the way, this review is now more than double the length of the movie. Now, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but this movie has a problem with characters, in that there are way too fucking many of them. 10 in total if you count Daedalus, and with the bulk of the movie only being 40 minutes, that's nowhere near enough time for them all to get any kind of focus. Now, of course, this problem affects some characters more than others. For example, on the far end of the spectrum, Ikaros, being the hypothetical focus of the movie, actually feels like a character with a purpose in the script. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have characters like Suguta and Sahora, who have zero role in the narrative. And it's there, somewhere in the lower end of that spectrum, that you'll find Nymph and Astria. Two allegedly main characters whose existence you absolutely cannot just sweep under the rug, whether that be because of their importance to the overall narrative or because of how many people clutching Nymph and Astria body pillows you have to sell tickets to. And no shade on that front, by the way. I'm a card-carrying member myself. But the point is, you have to have them in the movie, but there is no room for them. And as a result, Nymph and Astria in this movie are reduced to walking plot devices, excuses for conflict to happen. That way, they serve the more important narrative with Ikaros, while still technically appearing in the movie and saying things. And the means by which the filmmakers chose to accomplish this is to have the two of them fight. Over and over and over again. Nymph and Astria are fucking insufferable in this movie. All they do is fight over bullshit, and it's only ever in service of poofing conflict into existence where previously there was none. Nymph and Astria are fighting over food. That's how they're reintroduced for the movie. Then Nymph wants to go on a date to the zoo, but Astria wants to go on a date to the buffet. And so, they fight, despite the fact they could just do both, and indeed do. This causes Ikaros to feel sad, because she wants to go on a date too. She tries to ask Tomoki if she can come along as well, but they've already left, and so she feels even sadder. Then Nymph and Astria fight over the same thing again, so we can have a joke. Then they do that again, for the same reason. Then they fight so that Ikaros has an excuse to get pissed off and forcibly take Tomoki. So these two complex and interesting characters that we spent 2 seasons getting to know and growing with have been reduced here to incredibly annoying plot devices. So thanks for that, movie. And finally, number 1. The inevitable part where Sai rants about Chaos again. Oh, Chaos. My dear, sweet, wonderful Chaos. So, to recap for the billionth time now, the ending of Forte completely fucked her character. By disregarding her story in the manga and bringing her back early for the sake of a final boss fight, they not only ruined one of my personal favorite character arcs, but shot themselves in the foot for every single Heaven's Lost property adaptation going forward. Because Chaos is such an integral foundation in SNO's narrative, completely removing her from it causes the whole House of Cards to collapse in her wake. But, you know, as much as the ending of Forte did ruin my entire life, I admit to harboring a secret hope for this movie. Buried deep down in the tangled nest of cobwebs and dust at the center of my cold, black, and dead heart, there did lay a tiny shred of longing for this movie to provide me with something the manga never did. An epilogue for Chaos. The final pages of the final chapter of the manga literally ends with the conclusion of Chaos's arc. And so, after having grown so deeply invested in her story, while it was incredibly gratifying to see her arc conclude in such a dramatic, impactful, and satisfying way, there was always a little niggle that we never actually got to see Chaos living a happier life. We could only imagine it. And so, despite my expectations for the movie as a whole being non-existent, I did think that maybe, just maybe, I might get a tiny hint of satisfaction watching Chaos take part in the comedy hijinks of Eternal My Master. Now, of course, it would unfortunately be anime Chaos and not manga Chaos, but a little bit of mental effort into pretending otherwise would hopefully smooth that over. Right? Nope. So, as I said in part 7, the fact that Anime Chaos had her storyline wrapped up by a magic MacGuffin completely overriding her free will and turning her into a good guy with magic not only removed all the hardship and pathos from her character, but it also removed the need for even the most fundamental bits of character development to occur. For example, actually teaching Chaos what love is. That doesn't happen in the anime. To this day, even, she still has no idea. And as a consequence of that, guess what she's like here? This movie never, not even for a fucking second, lets you forget this is 100% anime Chaos, without a single shred of development on her. It's like the filmmakers are taunting me. Every time she makes that one fucking joke, which is literally all of her dialogue in this film, it's like they're saying, haha, she still thinks killing things is the same thing as love. It's a good thing she never had a pivotal character arc to learn the error of her ways. Nope, we just had to put a thing on her, which instantly turned her good because of magic. You remember the shitty ending of Forte? You remember? You remember? You remember? You remember? Do you remember? Do you remember? You remember? Do you remember? Yes! Shut the fuck up! This is like seeing the action figure version of your favorite superhero. Like, yeah, they look superficially the same, but one's an actual character with flaws and motivations and an arc, and the other is a hunk of plastic that when you pull on their drawstring, repeats their catchphrase over and over again. And unless you count her very presence ruining the story, Chaos also doesn't do a single narratively relevant thing over the course of the entire film, which is, again, hilarious as compared to the manga, where she was literally doing every single narratively relevant thing for a string of about 30 chapters. But nope, in this movie, she's just here. In the background, standing around in the group shots, occasionally making that one fucking joke every 5 minutes like clockwork. A clockwork angeloid, if you will. Chaos in this movie feels like the remnants of a horrible mistake that the staff are obliged to keep around out of guilt, but would prefer to acknowledge as little as humanly possible. Part 8. Miscellaneous Bitching. So, just a few last punches to the gut before we're done here. The music in this movie is terrible. The film alternates between horrible reuses of the TV anime's OST, placed in bizarrely inappropriate situations with terrible mixing and no flow whatsoever, into just fucking weird original music. Like, I swear to Christ they're playing the final countdown in this scene. God, it's all so fucking cheap. Next up, Mini Tomoki in this flashback to the Roman BC times. Why the fuck does this random kid 2,000 years ago look like Tomoki? In the manga, it's just a kid, and it's a provable fact that Tomoki isn't a carbon copy of an angel, so this creative decision is just weird. It bothers me that Chaos is openly acting like a psychopath and no one cares. Like, she seemingly spends her whole day killing bugs and asking what love is in a creepy, evil voice, and everyone just ignores her? It's obviously not intentional since she's not supposed to even be here, but it just makes every other character look trashy as hell for letting an 8-year-old in desperate need of therapy run around with a gun unsupervised, going, she'll be fine, before going back to watching fucking TV. Next, I made a joke in Part 8 that the anime creators were making changes to the story for the sole purpose of pissing specifically me off. Nymph was written wildly out of character, and Chaos was written out of the movie altogether, because I'm pretty sure by this point, the writers were trying to piss specifically me off. Well, I think there could be no more explicit proof of that fact than the literal first frame of this movie being Nymph dying in an explosion. This might as well be a signed letter from Kadokawa telling me to go fuck myself. Next up, music has always been pretty important thematically to SNO. It's got a great score, a bunch of different fantastic ending credits songs. There was that band episode with Fallen Down, and Season 2 was called Forte, and Season 3 was going to be called Fortissimo, both being musical terms. And yet, this movie is named Final, which means nothing, when Finale was right fucking there and literally a single letter away. And Final, I've mainly spent the video picking on all of the interestingly bad writing, which I think does a real disservice to how fucking boring 90% of this film is. So I think it's time to share the love. I want you guys to watch just 60 seconds of this movie. Watch this scene so you can see just how shockingly boring and unfunny the vast majority of this movie is. Just try to survive this 60 seconds without at some point feeling the urge to die. I dare you. Nope. Sorry, past Psy. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to sneak a full minute of uninterrupted footage past YouTube's copyright bots. Whatever. Just trust me, it sucks. I'm about to suggest you guys go download the movie for yourselves anyway, and now taking part in this dare is just another reason to do that. Time code for the scene that I was going to show here. Anyways, now we're going to pretend like I did show it to you. God, this scene is such a great encapsulation of so much of this goddamn movie. Filler scene, reuse music from the TV anime because they were too lazy to make their own song, Nymph and Astria fight over Tomoki, minute-long scene of fucking nothing happening, awkward pacing, speed lines trying to make the animation not feel stiff and lifeless, Chaos has one fucking joke that crushes my soul, and then we go to the next scene that has all the same fucking problems. While I've done my best to lay out this movie's faults here so that you don't need to actually go watch it to understand what's wrong with it, I would honestly encourage anyone who's made it this far into the video to just go download it for yourselves and skip through it. It really does have to be seen to be believed that they crammed this much atrocity into just 40 minutes. Part 9. Finally. Finale. And that's it. That's Eternal My Master, or at least the most important bits. Honestly, you could probably make an equally long review of the movie just talking about all the less important shit I decided to cut out. other stupid lines of dialogue, other scenes ripped from the manga, again without regard for the role they might have played in the story there, more amateurish filmmaking, more poor writing, even more retcons, even more terrible shots of animation, even more drama outside the movie, etc., etc. But I've at least touched on everything I consider vital, and if I decide I forgot something or want to expand on certain points, I can always just make a vlog on Sci Live. I would do a wrap-up of everything wrong with the movie, like with Part 8, but honestly, there's no point. It's all terrible. This movie lacks a single positive or redeeming quality. I mean, unless you want to count the fact that it finally killed the anime dead, thus ending both its and my own misery. But, yeah, a terrible ad for the manga, stapled to 30 minutes of nonsense filler so they could stick a price tag on it. That's it. We're done here. Or, we would be, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Hidden away in the special features menu of the Blu-ray for Eternal My Master is this. A 24-minute long version of Chapter 77, animated only with moving manga panels, but with all the original voice actors reading out the lines. And, incidentally, all of their performances are way better here.
なんだって、シナプスに近づけばお前が燃え尽きる。まったくこんな時に冗談とか相変わらずわけわかんねえやつだな。お前は引き返せ。お前が燃え尽きる。こんな時に冗談とか相変わらずわけわかんねえやつだな。お前は引き返せ。どうしたマスターの命令は絶対なんだろう。言ったじゃねえかよ。あの時そばにいろって言ったじゃねえかよ。言ったじゃねえかよ。
Now, all the sound effects and music are just recycled from the show, such that you can feel the resentment from the video editor that this side project didn't have any budget, but they got all the voice actors back, even ones like Minos and the Harpies who didn't have lines in the actual main film to do this reading.
こうして会うのは初めてだな、桜井智樹。よくぞここまで手こずらせてくれたものだ。だがバカがダウナーの分際でこの私の前に現れて何かできると思ったか。
And for me, this is the movie. This shitty-looking bonus feature, hidden away that barely anyone's even heard of, with less production value than even my YouTube videos doing the same thing. This is Eternal My Master.
どうして私いっぱいひどいことした。私悪い子なのにどうして。
おかえりちみっこ。
そうか、これが愛なのね。
All the way back in part 1, I talked about how every episode having different end credits animation and a new song was proof for me that I wasn't insane for liking SNO as much as I did. It was proof that the people working on the show agreed. That they were willing to do all this extra work, to go far and away beyond anyone's expectations, all because they cared about the show they were adapting. that we had seen the same big titty angel cartoon and the raw potential it held despite all appearances to the contrary, and that spark, that artistic passion was what drew me to the anime as much as it did and kept me coming back time and time again, kept it at the forefront of my mind for the last decade now. And I see that same spark here. It's faint, buried under layers and layers of corporate bullshit that is the actual film and the competing interests driving its creation. But it's there. Someone who gave a shit about SNO made this happen, and I am so thankful for that. They knew that this was it. There would never be a chance like this again, where all these actors would be in the same room together again, and where even though the main movie had to be shit, they could at least do this much. Their final push. And I respect the hell out of that. Well, that's really it, folks. We've reached the end of Eternal My Master, which also means we've reached the end of the love letter. Holy fuck, did you ever think we'd actually get here? I sure didn't. And now, here I am, faced with the prospect of writing some kind of satisfying conclusion, and honestly, I have no idea how. A satisfying ending for the love letter would involve coming to some grand final conclusion that potentially reframed the whole journey to get here in some new light that made everything feel special and important. But, I don't have anything like that. Which begs the question, was there a point to any of this? I mean, the problem is, the love letter has always been a very unique mixture of different, oftentimes conflicting goals. Getting the franchise talked about again, promoting the manga, and getting my own feelings and frustrations with the anime out. And not only was it trying to be all of those things at once, but it was trying to be all of those things at once while being written over the course of 3 years. 2017 with part 1, and now 2020 with part 10. Which means there is a lot of it that I look back on and think, God damn, that argument is terrible, and I wish I could rewrite that and make it better. And so trying to wrap it all up here, as though all of this had been building to some planned conclusion, is impossible, because that's never what it was. What the love letter was, if you wanted to unify all of the differing intentions behind its disparate elements under one banner, would be, well, a love letter. Certainly, as I said in part 1, SNO has been a huge influence on me creatively, and as such, I felt the show deserved more respect and acclaim for the things it did right, but honestly, I'd be lying if I said it still held that kind of influence over me now. Like, I said all the way back in part 1 that the love letter was a project 7 years and now a decade in the making. The flip side of which, meaning this was a project dreamed up by a 13-year-old me, who didn't have the skills or writing talent to execute any of this at the time. So, for me, writing this series was more like fulfilling a promise to my younger self, and the Sai of the present has a more well-founded respect for SNO as compared to the passionate intensity of my past self. As time's gone on, I've come to more closely appreciate other things, and now recognize a lot of flaws in SNO, but it still remains incredibly close to my heart regardless. I mean, this show was one of the major influences for my taste in media, and my desire to create things of my own in turn. If SNO had never come along and given me taste, I'm sure something else would have given time, but a lot of who I am today was built upon the foundation specifically created via SNO's influence. I started creating things online after SNO had given me taste, and made me super opinionated about media, and without that, who knows if I'd even be standing here talking to you right now. One of the first things I ever made was a terrible review of Clockwork Angeloid, which I might just upload on SciLive after this for the hell of it. And that particular video is what originally attracted the attention of a Mr. Isaiah Christou, who reached out to me because of it. Nowadays, he's one of my best friends, and in addition to doing podcasts together, I just recently flew over to Canada to meet him in person for the first time. So you can see that SNO itself has long since been removed from the equation, but the butterfly ripple effect it caused over my life continues to this day. And that ripple continues even now in the form of this video series, which in a lot of ways marked a very real transition point for me as a YouTuber. Like, if you go back and watch my videos pre-Love Letter, they're all pretty badly written top 10s without much substance or quality. But that all changed after I started writing the Love Letter, which was the start of an enormous explosion of self-improvement. With SNO as my muse, my ability to write and tell stories advanced by leaps and bounds, even between individual videos in this series. I owe an incalculable debt to Heaven's Lost Property. For how much I grew as a person because of it, for how much I advanced artistically, for all the friends I made along the way, for the laughs and the tears, the good times and the bad, all of that led to this, to my magnum opus, dedicated to a series that has meant so much to me, that was so foundational in who I am as a person and what my life is like today. Dedicated to an anime that built my taste from the ground up, and whose lessons I carry with me to this day. To a series that, as I said, strives to go above and beyond what anyone would have expected from it, and inspires me to do the same. A series like that, I think, would deserve nothing less than a love letter. So, from the bottom of my heart, Heaven's Lost Property, thank you. Love Sigh. P.S. Oh my god, Nymph is so fucking hot! Part 10, Encore. Hey everyone, thank you guys so much for watching this stupidly long video series. Apologies for how long it took to finally get part 10 out, but I hope it's obvious now why that was the case. So, just a few quick channel updates that I wanted to mention. Now that I am finally done with the love letter and free of Kickstarter jail, I'm finally going to start making more regular and smaller videos again, thank God. That said, I'm still working a full-time job and doing YouTube as a hobby, and so I figured now is a convenient time to reopen my Patreon. I've switched it to a per-video basis, which is more fitting to my current, very infrequent, high-quality video upload schedule, but how much I'm making from that basically directly correlates to how many hours I have to put in at work, and thus to how much time I can spend working on future projects. The goal is still eventual full-time YouTube, it's just that we've had some setbacks. The Patreon reward tiers are also all in flux at the moment as well, but I'll hopefully have a video on Psy Live not too long after this clarifying that more. And on the note of future projects, I have got a fantastic script for a K-On! Video that I've had sitting in my to-do pile for over a year now, and that'll almost certainly be next on my schedule. I'd also really like to do a God Hand video, and I've got quite a lot to say about Doom Eternal as well, but those are still both in the super early scripting phase. Anyways, that's it for the love letter. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you'll go check out Heaven's Lost Property if you still haven't. And, of course, I want to really thank all of my Kickstarter backers for making this possible in the first place. I know my delivery was slow, but each video ended up being like twice as long as I assumed they would be. But regardless, the money I got from the Kickstarter allowed the project to balloon like that. And without all of the extra time provided by it, I don't know if parts 8, 9, and 10 would have ever gotten done, or if they even would have been a fourth as good. So thank you to every single person who donated to that. I really appreciate it. And in specific, I'd like to mention Andreas Vincent Smith, Anime Watcher, Aaron Walton, Artemis9, Austin Hardaway, a weeb that paid $50 for waifu stickers, Benjamin Christian, Caleb Marvel, Christopher Marquez, Deuce Slaggett, Duncan Austin, Evan, Fiery Dance, I Human, Isaiah Christo, fuck that guy, Izanagi, Joe Anderson, Jonas Jes Viladson, Mexiner, Necrocon Hearts, Potato Alchemy, Radical FPR, Rory, Sal Hassan, Scorch 1133, Chauville Arad, Simi, Tanner D. Williams, Titel, Wise Dude Taking You to School, and Zachary Bloomstrand. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.